All right, good morning, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today as we take a look at some of the plants to use for tough situations. My name is Jamie Heflin, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to quickly run through a few housekeeping notes. This is a webinar, so your camera and microphone have been disabled. Questions can be typed into the Q&A box at any time. We will either type an answer back or answer your question live, with some questions being held until the end based on timing. Keep an eye out for some polls during the webinar, as well as a survey at the end. A follow-up email will be sent out within about an hour or so after the presentation is done. And this will have an email with a link to a required test for those of you that are looking to earn your continuing education credits. Please note the test should be completed within 24 hours of the conclusion of the webinar. And lastly, this is a webinar and it's being recorded, and it will be available on YouTube early next week. Whoop, skipped ahead there. So this is actually our 7th webinar that we've had in the past couple of months. And I want to go ahead and launch a quick poll here, because I thought it'd be great to see how many of you have attended some of our other webinars. So you should see a poll pop up. Go ahead and start clicking away. These webinars are listed chronologically, starting with our new intros in January, moving on to our series featuring our industry partners in February, and then on to our March sessions with Shannon and Nikki. If you happen to miss any of these sessions, have no worries. You can view them in their entirety on our YouTube channel. Also, I just wanted to give a quick reminder that Midwest Groundcovers is a wholesale nursery supplying landscape professionals. We are not open to the general public, nor do we sell directly to the public. So we encourage retail customers to reach out directly to their local independent garden centers for assistance locating a plant. So here are the results from our poll. And it looks like many of you have joined us previously, so that's great. It's so nice to have everybody back. Our presenters for today's webinar are Sales and Operations Manager Nikki Moline and Marketing Manager Shannon McInerney. Nikki and Shannon are passionate about plants and love to share their knowledge via educational webinars, videos, and when possible through in-person presentations. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn us over to Nikki and Shannon.
All right, good morning, everybody. So thank you guys for joining us for another webinar. We're excited you're here, and we have a lot of great plant stuff to talk about today. So the first thing we wanted to kick off was just a little bit of a tutorial on how to use our website, because I think through the surveys at the end of these presentations, we've been getting a lot of requests for plant lists for situational type landscape issues, or drought tolerant, rabbit resistant, deer resistant, pollinator plants, that kind of thing. So we have a really great page on our website. It's under the plant search, and you can actually generate a lot of these lists yourself by going on our website and using the tool that we've developed here. So you can go on if you have specific plant care categories. So you're looking for a perennial or shrub or ground cover, looking for a particular brand even, have particular size needs or hardiness needs, and then specific attributes. So you're looking for something that's salt tolerant, or, attracts butterflies, or, is drought tolerant, whatever you're looking for. You can actually go in here and be as specific as you want to be on our plant search. So you can select not that many attributes, or you could go crazy and select a lot. And our website will kind of dig through our database of over 1,500 different plants and then spit out a few options for you. So I highly recommend that you guys pop onto the website, kind of play around with it. And, I think this is a great tool to use when you're dealing with a tough situation, potentially, in a landscape, or trying to find a plant that meets a very particular need. So just wanted to show you guys that briefly before we jump in to the rest of the presentation.
All right, so the first category, or the first situation we're going to talk about today is dry shade. We get quite a few questions on this. Dry shade can occur under the eaves of a building. So I know we have some situations like that at our office at Midwest where we've got an overhang where underneath doesn't get a lot of sun or water. Obviously in a woodland type situation where you have a pretty dense tree canopy, sometimes it's hard to get water down there. So you end up with dry shade. So, a lot of the shade plants people are familiar with are, want more water. So astilbe, ligularia, ferns, things like that. So we do, like I said, get this question a lot about what can I plant in dry shade. So I do want to note a lot of these plants that we're going to talk about, what they can tolerate the dry once they're established. So that first, 6 weeks or so, even into the first growing season, you want to make sure that they're kind of taken care of then, but then once they're situated, kind of have their roots in the ground, then they should be okay. In the drier situation. So we do have a garden addressing specifically this at our St. Charles location. So you can find those plant lists on our website. It's under the Our Gardens tab, the dry shade garden, because Nikki just told you about the website, but some of these plants that we're going to talk about, if you filter dry and shade on the website, they're not going to come up because their preferable situation is moist, well drained. But again, once they're established, they can tolerate the dry. So definitely, if you want to see more plants for these situations, go to that Our Gardens tab and check out the plant list there. So the first plant that we're going to talk about is Epimedium rubrum, and this is probably a little bit more, I guess, classic dry shade plant. So I think it's more well known that this plant can tolerate the dry. So you see the kind of the delicate foliage there, really nice heart-shaped leaves. When they're emerging in spring, they get that reddish tinge to the edge, which is really nice. And again, once these get established, they're a really tough dry shade plant. So they can compete against trees and shrubs, kind of the root competition in those understories. And they are a little bit slow growing. So, you kind of have to be patient with this one. But then when it does get established, it will form a really nice clump for you and take up a nice, chunk of real estate. So these have a kind of red and slightly bicolor flower, but mostly a red flower. There is also sulfurium, Epimedium sulfurium, that has the yellow flower. So Epimedium are a great plant for the dry shade.
All right, next up we have Thalictrum dioicum. So this I would say is a pretty underutilized plant. We don't sell a ton of it, but I think here at Midwest, we really, really love this plant. This is another one that's planted in our kind of walk from the employee parking lot. So I see this plant every day, and I've just really grown to love and appreciate it. So when you guys research this one, it's another kind of note on Shannon, what Shannon said at the beginning. This one will actually not come up as like drought tolerant or dry shade, but we have it planted in a few different locations on our property in dry shade, and it performs very well. So this is tried and true as far as our experience goes. So this plant's really nice because it has a very delicate texture. You can see the foliage there. It's almost fern-like. It almost reminds me of a maidenhair fern almost when it's just coming up with the foliage. The flowers are really beautiful too, very dainty. Gets these kind of yellow-green flowers with a little bit of a purple touch, so very beautiful. And the plant does get to be on the, I would say, kind of medium size, so about 24 to 36 inches tall and wide. Added bonuses here, it is deer resistant, so we don't really have problems with the deer touching it, and it will attract butterflies as well as we start seeing them come into the area in late spring. This guy's also pretty fast growing. So, if you plant it, gets established pretty quickly. It is a zone 3 plant. It's also native to Illinois. So other added bonuses, I love native plants. So this one is also native to Illinois. One thing I do want to mention with this guy, it is a little bit sensitive to heat and humidity. So you may see a little bit of powdery mildew if it doesn't have kind of good airflow around it. So, if you have it tightly planted with other things, that could be an issue for you in the summer. But otherwise, we think this plant's pretty amazing. So that's Thalictrum dioicum, or early meadow root.
All right, so next up we have Helleborus Rome in red, and kind of this is a representative, I would say, for all the Helleborus, and their adaptability to dry shade. You know, I think that Helleborus are kind of taking off in popularity, which is so warranted because it's such a great early spring plant. Some of the colors they're starting to breed for are amazing. And you know, like it's in here, once it's established, it can tolerate the dry shade. So um Helleborus actually have a pretty extensive root system. So it takes a little time. They're kind of a slow grower. So you can see this plant in the picture here that was probably taken in maybe its first or second season. So it does take them a little bit of time to fill out and make a nice plant, but it is so worth it when they do. Um, so yes, it's getting that root system established. I will say that once you have one in place, don't move it or try not to move it because it has that extensive root system, you know, it doesn't really want to be transplanted around. So find a good spot for it, plant it, and you know, once it's established, it will hold up really well. It's got that nice foliage too, kind of, you know, evergreenish. So it doesn't need that, you know, outside of the growing season where it's really coming up and the flowers are coming out and the new leaves are coming out. It doesn't need a huge you know, water intake. So Roman red, we've had it for a couple years and just really love the color on it, that deep, you know, burgundy to wine red color. So keep an eye out because in the next couple of years we plan to introduce a couple more Helleborus again, just because we think that um, they're a plant that needs to be used more. So Helleborus Roman red.
All right, next one is Gillenia trifoliata. You've also might have heard this one under the name of Porteranthus trifoliatus. It's one of those that's gone through a number of name changes over the years. So this plant's really cool, and again, I think pretty underutilized. Has multi-season interest, which if you've heard me talk before, I love plants that have interest throughout the season, not just, you know, a nice flower. And this plant's really interesting because it almost looks like a version of Gara, if you guys are familiar with that. So really beautiful starry white flowers in the summertime. And then those flowers develop really cool kind of red-black seed heads that'll persist for you in the winter. So we have some nice winter interest on this plant, and it also gets really nice fall color as well. So it'll turn kind of a bright red color for you in the fall. Interesting perennial as well. It's almost like a woody perennial. I think the first time I saw it, I wasn't quite sure what exactly it was, if it was a perennial or a shrub, because the stems are pretty hardy and they do feel a bit woody. But really nice, keeps its upright stature, can handle dry shade, can handle root competition under trees once it's established, as Shannon referenced in the beginning. And yeah, I think, again, pretty underutilized plants. So good for dry shade, has multi-season interest, really nice fall color, really nice seed heads in the winter. So if you haven't tried it yet, give Gillenia trifoliata a try.
All right, so then last in this dry shade section, we have Phlox divaricata blue moon. So many of you may be familiar with the straight species Phlox divaricata or woodland phlox. And this is going to be pretty similar to that. The flower is, I would say, a little bit fuller, maybe a little bit deeper blue. And I think the overall habit is a little bit nicer, you know, a little more rounded out where the straight species can sometimes get a little straggly looking. So this plant, I remember the first time I saw it in the nursery, I actually smelled it before I saw it because that fragrance is so wonderful, so beautiful. So especially if you have a dry shade situation close to a patio or something like that, this would be a great plant to use. So again, you know, it will do well in dry shade after it's established. It will kind of naturalize, so kind of spread out a little bit, good for taking up some space. Um, it gets it gets nice fall color, and with the blooming, after the first bloom, if you shear it back, sometimes you can kind of get a second flush out of it. So it's worth it to that point too. One thing I will say, because I've personally had this issue, is rabbits do like this plant. So I know we've on a few of the other slides that we've said plants are rabbit resistant. This one, if you do have a lot of rabbits, know that you're either going to have to protect it somehow, or, you know, maybe not the best one to use, because I keep trying, but not having a lot of luck. So, but yes, otherwise this is a great plant and definitely a great plant for dry shade. So Flax Blue Moon. So we have our first poll. So of those dry shade plants, can let us know which is your favorite.
Yeah, I love that Phlox Blue Moon too, Shannon, but same problem. I planted, I think, 3 plants last year and the rabbits just kept mowing it down.
Yeah,
it didn't even grow. I was like,
it's
no.
been 2 or 3 years, and every year I'm like, just stay away.
I know. It must be very delicious.
It must be. Helleborus, yes, yes. We need more Helleborus out there. They're just such a great first sign of spring. So
yeah, I think they're really growing on us too. So good. I'm excited about what Shannon said too. We will be carrying more soon. All right, so now we're going to jump into wet areas. We have gotten a lot of requests for plant lists on this situation. So I think this is pretty common, especially up here in the Chicagoland area. You know, this actually was, I think, mostly wetland back in, you know, historical times. So we do have some drainage issues around here. So with, you know, wet areas, the biggest cause of plant death is due to rotting roots, because the plant can't access oxygen through the root system. So that's kind of the biggest issue that we have. And, you know, a lot of times, those of you guys that are landscape contractors, you can do things to mitigate water and to improve drainage, but sometimes it's not cost effective, or sometimes, you know, the area is nice and you just want to enhance it with plants. So there are plenty of plants out there that can handle wet areas. So we'll go through some of those here today. Now, one thing I do want to say is we're not going through any aquatic plants today. So none of these plants are good for what I would say prolonged submersion. So none of these plants are going to be good to just sit in water. It's more so when we have a rain event, you know, it gets wet, and then, you know, the water does drain away. So we're not going over aquatic plants that can like sit in a pond edge or something like that today. So I wanted to clarify that. So the first item that we're going to talk about, I actually have just completely fallen in love with this plant, Cephalanthus occidentalis sugar shack. So this is a native so it was bred from Cephalanthus occidentalis, which is a native that you would find kind of, you know, on the upper side of pond edges, not again in the water, but can handle some wetter conditions. This one has glossy foliage that actually, when it's first coming out in the spring, kind of has a really beautiful red tinge. Then we get a nice glossy foliage during the summer. And then in the fall, the leaves turn a bright red burgundy again. So again, multi-season interest plants, love them. And then they get these like really cool.
Nikki, your sound went out. Nikki, your sound went out.
Did I lose audio again? Okay.
Yeah, you're good now.
I'm back. Sorry, guys. I personally really like that Proven Winners bred this one because it is more compact. So the native species on this one can be like almost 8 feet tall, which would be a monster in the garden. This one's much more compact at 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. Can take some sun and part shade, so pretty versatile. And, you know, pollinators love it. So pollinators, huge trend right now. Everybody loves a pollinator plant. So make sure you guys check out Cephalanthus Sugar Shack for, you know, a wet area.
All right, so next up we have Itea virginica Scarlet Beauty. So this is part of the Chicagoland Grows program. And so actually it was selected kind of right in our own backyard here from the Morton Arboretum. This plant had been in their collection since the 1950s. And they noticed that this particular variety, you know, sometimes with the Itea when they get in the more alkaline soils, they tend to get that chlorotic, kind of lighter greeny yellow foliage color. All Itea are going to prefer more acidic soil, but in particular, this plant, when it's in a more alkaline soil, it doesn't do that as much. It holds a deeper green foliage. So this is why they thought this plant was really great. So other things too is most of the other kind of more common Itea that you see on the market are only hardy to zone 5, whereas this is hardy to zone 4. So if we've got some people on that are in Wisconsin or Minnesota or places like that, this is one for you to check out. So this plant, I see we had a question about whether all these plants, you know, whether they prefer moist soil or they can tolerate it in the spring. I think it's kind of going to be on a case-by-case basis as we go through them. This plant is in general going to prefer a moister soil. So it's not one that's going to really want to dry out too much or take some of the big swings. So it is a great plant, kind of like the Cephalanthus for stream banks, areas that are going to kind of be continuously moist or on the more moist side. It likes soils with more organic matter, but it can tolerate, if it's a poorer soil too. This does get a little bit bigger than some of the other Itea on the market too. So if you're looking for something that's going to take up a little more space, have a little more space for it, this would be a good variety. And this has a really nice red, orange, and yellow fall color, and that will last all the way until the first hard frost. So Nikki's talked about multiple season interest. It has the white flowers when Itea, typically bloom in June or so, and then has the great fall color too. So definitely a plant to check out if you have a damper area, which is Itea Scarlet Beauty.
Yeah, and we'll try and point out which ones prefer moister conditions, I guess, as we go through versus ones that can take a swing. Cephalanthus is another one that probably just prefers to be on the moister side. So now here, Lobelia siphilitica, or great blue lobelia. Now this one can also be applied in a rain garden. So this one can take maybe a little bit more of the swing of wet to dry. So this plant is good for those kinds of conditions. So Lobelia syphilitica is really one of my favorites. I love plants with blue flowers. I think, they're not as available out there. And this one really does have a really nice kind of blue light purple flower. So this one is a part of our Natural Garden Natives line. And for those of you guys that haven't heard us speak before, Natural Garden Natives is a native in-house brand that we carry. And all plants in the Natural Garden Natives line are local ecotypes. So that means that the seed was collected within 90 miles of St. Charles. So these plants were born and bred in the Chicagoland area. So they're perfect for garden conditions around us. So this one in particular is a really beautiful plant that flowers in the late summer, early fall. If you're into, again, pollinator gardens, this is a great late season food source for pollinators, so butterflies, bees, which is really important when you're creating a pollinator garden. In the wild, we see this one more native to woodlands and wetlands. So again, it can take a little bit of that dry, but can also handle some wet feet at times. And this one is also deer tolerant, so very important in our area as well. I like this one too. It's a little bit more short, and I would say like a little bit beefier than cardinal flower. Cardinal flower, the red version of this, basically gets very tall and skinny. This one's a little bit more short and I would say beefier with that blue purple flower color. So if you haven't tried it, make sure to try some Lobelia syphilitica or great blue lobelia.
All right, so next up, we have Acorus gramineus Minimus Aureus, so kind of a mouthful there. But so you may be familiar with the native Acorus americanus, or sweet flag. So this is dwarf golden sweet flag. And so you can see, whereas the native is green and taller, about 24 to 36 inches tall. This has that nice golden green color, about 4 inches taller. So this is part of our Hocus Pocus Groundcovers program. We have, I think, close to 90 varieties there. So kind of ground covers for all different kinds of situations. So you can, check that out on our website if you're looking for other various specific situations. But in terms of wet conditions, this is one that also is going to want to be in moist soil, more of the time, not just have a big swing in spring and then dry out. So this is more of a pond edge plant, something like that. But sweet flag, as like the native sweet flag, it has that great foliage where if it's crushed, it has a really nice scent to it, kind of a citrusy scent is what this one has. So I would say if you have, a wet area that's also like within some steppers or something like that, this would be great to interplant because when you step on it, release that nice fragrance. So kind of a nice combination of things there. So this is deer resistant, as well as some of the other ones we've mentioned. One thing about this one, if it does dry out, so again, this doesn't want to see the big swings. If it does dry out, you'll tend to see some browning on the tips of the plant. So this is one that wants to be in more moist conditions. From what I see, it seems like the jury's out whether it can take standing water or not. I saw one place that said it does not like standing water, and somewhere else that said, it could take up to 3 to 4 inches or so of standing water. So not quite sure how to advise you there because we don't really have a space like that at our property. But if you end up trying it and have any advice for us, please let us know so we can share it. But yes, otherwise kind of a great, probably underutilized plant for a situation like that. So Acorus Minimus Aureus.
Okay, the next one we have for you guys is a Carex. So I think a lot of you know we carry many different Careces in our line, and this one is one that really likes to be, wet. So this one, again, might not take the swings quite as well. I think it prefers to stay on the moist side, but it's really cool because it's one of the more ornamental Carex, and you can see that seed head there. So it gets these starry seed heads that will persist. So, and they the plant gets loaded with them. I was trying to find a picture of the plant just loaded with those seed heads. Couldn't really find one, but it's very, very ornamental. One of the more ornamental Carex. It gets about 24 to 36 inches tall, so a little bit bigger on the Carex side, but it is a clump former, so it will form a nice clump for you. It doesn't do the thing where it kind of runs off. It will form a nice kind of full clump. It can take shade to part sun, but again, it prefers to be more on the moist side in the shade. And it does attract a lot of wildlife. And for those of you guys that are interested in attracting interesting wildlife, this is a favorite food for native turkeys and for wood ducks. So if you have a location where you have those on your property, they love to munch on these. So on the seed heads, not the foliage, but they would love this as a food source. So I thought that was really cool. And if I had a property like that, I would love a wild turkey. So this plant's also extremely hardy. So it's hardy to zone 3, and it is a natural garden native. So again, local ecotype to our Chicagoland area here. So make sure to try some Carex grayi. And now we're going to do a poll. So we are interested in knowing which wet area plant was your favorite from the presentation today. Kind of a wide variety of plants here, a couple shrubs, some natives. So yeah. Pretty wide array.
On that note, about the Carex grayi seeds, I did forget to mention that Phlox Blue Moon in the first round. That's a great pollinator source for tiger swallowtails. So I know a lot of people are interested in that. So.
Yeah, so it looks like a Cephalanthus sugar shack. Yeah, I'm really excited about that plant. I think it's so versatile and really nice that they bred it on the more compact side. So great choice, guys.
Very cool plant. So, Okay, so the next situation we're going to move on to is salt tolerance. This is another question we get a lot, I think, being in this urban area that we're in. So obviously there's, salt spray from, a winter like we just had where we get quite a bit of snow. We get a lot of salt being thrown out there on the roads and affecting medians and plantings like that. But there are also, salt tolerance to take into consideration if you're in more of a coastal area. Probably not so much around the lake here, but that would be more if you're on the actual coasts. Um, and then there are just situations where you can get accumulations of salt in the soil. So if you're in a more arid region, we do obviously have heavy clay soils here. So sometimes the salt can kind of bind up in those soils. Poor drainage, things like that. So obviously we have a lot of different situations here where we can see salt. So this picture here, allium is a great and probably more commonly known plant that's good for salt tolerance. So this here is Allium summer peekaboo, which is one of our introductions. So moving on to our first plant is Achillea millefolium new vintage violet. So again, kind of as I mentioned with some of the other plants like the Helleborus, Achillea across the board is going to be a great plant for salt tolerance. So you'll see it in a lot of plantings in various parts of the country, and it's a great median planting. I know when I was like in Denver, you see it in the health strips there because it can take kind of those intense salt conditions, drought conditions, heat conditions, stuff like that. So just an overall very tough plant. So why new vintage violet is so great, or why we liked it so much, is because at that point we really hadn't seen this violet color, this purple color in an Achillea. The yellows are common, oranges, we even see quite a few of the pinks and rosy pinks and stuff like that. So we felt like this was a really great contrast to all those colors, something new for Achillea. This plant also has a really nice habit. So it's about 12 to 18 inches tall. It says 8 to 12 inches wide. I would say it's probably more on the 12-inch side than the 8-inch side, so just be aware of that. But it does make a nice compact clump. You can cut it back after it's done blooming and sometimes get kind of a reflush with this one as well. One thing I will say about this is it does prefer to be more dry than more wet. So if it's in a wetter soil, then you might see it kind of, lodge a little bit or open up. So again, it's a great plant for a tough site where you're going to have salt, where you're going to have, drought or heat, things like that. So definitely one to check out if you haven't tried it, Achillea new vintage violet.
So we had a comment just really quick on deer tolerance versus rabbit tolerance. So I just want to make a quick comment on that. So we're trying to refer to what plants we're seeing as not being maybe as tasty to both deer and rabbit. But with rabbits in particular, they can be little monsters. They will eat whatever they can get their hands on if population's really high and they're hungry for whatever reason. They can't find other food sources. So finding rabbit resistant plants is actually much more difficult than finding deer resistant plants because they will eat. Like, personal experience too, if there's a lot of them and they're really hungry, they'll eat whatever. So we're trying our best. We know we have people all throughout the Midwest here, not just urban areas, so deer's a real big issue too. So we're trying to give you guys advice where we can and what we've been seeing in the garden. But yeah, those little critters, they can be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, we have some coyotes around us and stuff, so we don't see a huge amount of rabbit damage in the garden, I would say, also because we have such a wide variety of plants too. I think that helps. So
yeah, our garden's one big salad, so then they can chew on what they actually prefer. So so this plant, Clethra summer sparkler, you may have seen it when it first came out as Clethra Einstein, so it went through a name change. Always fun on the sales side of things. But this plant we've been really impressed with. Clethra in general can be a slower grower. This Clethra summer sparkler has been, I think, a much more robust and faster grower for us, both in production and our experience and just seeing it grow in general. It's also much more floriferous than other Clethra and gets longer, panicles of flowers. So you can see that picture there. I kind of liked the original name Einstein because, it was like Einstein's hair, but Summer Sparkler is a nice name too. So this plant is incredibly fragrant too in its flowering, which I think is an added bonus. A lot of times when they do breeding on plants, they breed out the fragrance. So it's always like, I feel like a nice little added bonus when we get plants bred with some fragrance added. So this plant's going to be hardy to zone 4, going to have that nice bloom time midsummer, and has a really nice tidy form. And you guys can keep it a little bit more compact if you want to by pruning it in the late winter to keep its nice kind of round shape. But again, this plant was bred to be kind of nice and shapely, so you guys don't have to do a ton of maintenance to this guy. Other thing I want to reference is fall color. So it does have some really nice fall color as well. So again, a nice multi-season interest plant. So that's Clethra Summer Sparkler.
All right, so I just noticed that it looks like someone has their hand raised. We can't interact with you. So if you do have a question, I don't know if that was just by accident, but if you do have a question, just go ahead and throw it in the Q&A, please, and we will get to it. Okay, so our next plant is Festuca, cool as ice. So this was introduced by Brent Horvath out of Intrinsic Perennial Garden, just a little ways north of us. And this is, I think, a great improvement over, most people are probably familiar with Elijah Blue. I know the first year that we had this plant planted in our trial garden, it really did stay, it says it's semi-evergreen. It stayed blue like all winter. It looked fantastic. So I did read that in harsher winters, it will tend to brown out a little bit more. That was several years ago, so I can't remember exactly what kind of winter we had that year. But I just know that, kind of all through the winter, every time you'd go by, even as we got into spring, that it really did hold its blue color nicely. So, as typical with Festuca, I think Elijah Blue's the same, that this can handle the salt, or it has the salt tolerance. And it's kind of similar to the Achillea, where it can handle those more difficult sites too. So the salt tolerant, the drought tolerance, it can handle the heat, humidity, things like that. So just a tough plant for those situations. Be aware that kind of the clump that you see there, it will get to that, 18 to 24 inch size, but it's not going to spread a whole lot. So it's going to stay that size and then stay pretty contained. So if you're looking for good coverage, weed suppression, things like that, you want to plant these a little bit tighter than you normally would. Otherwise, you're going to kind of, have little silos, I guess. And another thing on this is over time, these can kind of, brown out in the center a little bit. So it is nice to divide these every couple years to just keep them healthy and robust. So just a tip on that. But like I said, the color that these held through the winter was just outstanding. So if you have a median or something like that, it would be great interest for that. So Festuca, cool as ice.
All right, we have a couple questions back on the Clethra that I think we can answer pretty quickly here. So yes, we got a comment about the fall color on the Clethra. So one of our plans here in the future at Midwest in the next couple of years is for us to do a shrub display garden. So once we have that, we'll be able to provide more of those photos, but we don't have one quite at the moment. So, but thank you for the comment. We are working towards that. The other thing on Clethra, yes, they do prefer acidic soil, but Clethra Einstein it is salt tolerant. So I know that's a little confusing, but remember, salt tolerant means that the plant's just not going to get killed from salt spray or anything like that. So even though the plant itself, like the native version, may prefer acidic soils, Einstein can handle some salt, or summer sparkler. And then as far as soil preference on the Clethra, it does prefer to be more on the moist side and actually can take a little bit of wetter conditions as well. So kind of multi-purpose there, and actually it can handle clay soils as well. So I think Clethra can almost handle all the categories that we talked about today. All right, so moving into Heuchera Autumn Bride. This one, you know, Heuchera, they do a lot of breeding for the colored foliage, which I'm a huge fan of. I'm a huge foliage nerd. I love colored foliage. I love shade gardening. But Heuchera Autumn Bride, I think, is one that's really grown on me. So gets these huge leaves. I mean, the leaves are just really robust and big. They're pretty fuzzy, which is kind of fun. And it gets this really nice kind of limey green color. So I think one of the things we get asked for a lot too is like a more chartreuse Heuchera for the sun or shade. Now this plant's not like chartreuse, but I think it could serve that purpose if you're looking for a brighter color. So I would recommend trying this one out. It is a villosa type. So again, if you guys have come to our presentations, we've talked about Heuchera villosa types, which means they're more tolerant of heat and humidity, which we need here in the Midwest, because some Heuchera can burn or melt out once the heat and humidity set in the summer. One thing on this one too, one of the issues you can see with Heuchera is frost heaving in the winter. You can see a little bit on this particular plant too, but once it's established, you really shouldn't see the frost heaving issue, and you can lightly mulch this guy in the winter to help protect the root system. The reason why it does that is because Heuchera have super fibrous root systems, so they pop out of the ground easily with that frost and thaw. Another kind of cool thing to mention on this guy is it's very floriferous. So if you're really a fan of Heuchera flowers, I know they don't do a ton of breeding for that. It's usually about the foliage, but this one gets really beautiful kind of thick white flowers. So, and this one can handle some sun as well. So that's Heuchera Autumn Bride.
All right, we had a question about how Nikki mentioned the villosa types, that whether that was on our website, and yes, that information on the Heuchera is in the, if you click into each Heuchera, that is in the plant description there. So, and I will say I agree with Nikki on Autumn Bride too. That's one that's really grown on me in the past couple years. And we have that one planted up at Route 25 at our entrance. So obviously pretty tough conditions, salt conditions up there, and it's done really well. So. So our next plant is Rosa rugosa Raspberry Rugostar. So you probably didn't notice on the first slide we had was of our revitalized median garden, which is relatively new. It's planted in there. So if you go back, if you're looking to watch the webinar again, check out that first slide and you can kind of see it there. So obviously, Rosa rugosa are kind of a common, urban plant, used a lot in situations like that. So these, I think, are pretty well known to be salt tolerant, but kind of wanted to highlight this one because it's a newer introduction and a little bit different than some of the other ones based on its size. So, many of the other ones get 3 to 4 feet, even 4 to 6 feet tall. So this is a nice ground cover rugosa rose where it's only going to get 2 to 3 feet tall. And so then you can see there, it's got the nice deep pink blooms. They have kind of a clove-like fragrance. So again, if you're, near an entryway, something like that, some added bonus to it. It has nice disease resistance. It has good deer resistance. So again, just a nice tough plant for those type of situations. It does well in alkaline soil. It can handle wind. It can handle dry. Again, so a good median type plant to hold up to everything. Like the Clethra, this is also an introduction from Star Roses and Plants. So they're doing obviously a lot of nice breeding into these trickier situations. So again, this is Rosa rugosa Raspberry Rugostar.
So we'll jump into the poll here with salt tolerant plants. So you guys can let us know your favorite. And actually, Shannon, looks like we got quite a few questions on the rose. So maybe we can take some of those. So does this one have hips that persist into the winter?
Yes, I believe it does. Like a typical rugosa rose would. Yes.
Okay, and then some questions on deer, rabbits, Japanese beetles. What's the take?
Well, I think with any rose, Japanese beetles, if you have them around you, you may have an issue with them. I would say it's really hard to predict. you know, I like at my house, I don't really see a whole lot of issues with Japanese beetles. I know you go other places and they're just totally destroyed roses. So, but yes, with any rose, there's a possibility. Rabbits, I don't think there's so much of an issue with these. These are pretty thorny. So good luck to you, rabbits, I guess, if you want to go after those. There was a question about whether it's native. No, we do carry several native roses, but Rosa rugosa are not native.
All right, you guys are interested in the Clethra Summer Sparkler, so that is yes, a great one we are excited about too. Somebody made a comment about chlorosis on rugosas. We have not seen chlorosis on this one in particular, just to tell you guys, and we have it planted in a very tough spot. It does not get much love, so just so you guys are aware of that. Okay, so we're gonna jump into our, I think, final kind of tough area here with clay soils. So I think this is something, especially in the Midwest, that we deal with a lot. You may deal with this, especially in like newer subdivisions where they scrape off the good soil and then you're left with clay, which is kind of tough to plant in. But clay does have some benefits. It does hold water well and it is abundant in nutrients. However, very sticky, so plants with like very fibrous root systems may have a hard time, very fine root systems. So when we're dealing with clay, we like things with a kind of stronger tap root, so it can kind of dig through that clay and you know, kind of help rebuild the organic matter. So if you do have clay soils, now of course this conversation today is not about how to amend soils. Shannon and I know some about that, but we're not the experts there. But we do want to put in a plug for Midwest Trading Product. So their One Step product is really great for helping amend clay soil. So you can work that into the soil as you're, you know, planting or creating a new bed, and maybe just kind of, you know, reapply a little bit here and there to help, again, add more organic matter into the soil. That's how you know, slowly start to convert clays into a better garden soil. So, but we're here to talk about plants, so we'll jump into that. But, you know, if you shop at Midwest Trading too, you can try out One Step. So we will go on to Aronia. If we can advance the slide, thank you. So we're going to talk about two Aronia here today, and these are both bred by proven winners. So again, I get excited when there's some breeding done on native shrubs. So native shrubs, I feel like, are underutilized, but the straight species, they can be maybe a bit more large, or, you know, maybe not have as nice form for a more formal landscape setting. So these Aronia that they've bred have, I think, really great landscape features. So there's hedger and there's mound. So by those names, you can already tell that they're going to have a little bit of different form and size in the garden. So hedger is going to be on the taller side, have a more upright habit, and low-scape mound is going to be more short to the ground, mounded. They also have one called ground hug, which is more of a ground Aronia as well, but we don't have that one featured here on the slide. So again, one of my favorite things, multi-season interest shrubs. So these shrubs get really beautiful flowers, have really nice kind of green glossy foliage. The flowers then turn to berries in the fall. And then this plant probably has one of the nicest fall colors, almost kind of a rainbow of oranges and reds and yellows. So beautiful fall color. One of the other nice things about this plant kind of being bred from a native is it doesn't do a lot of the suckering that you would see on the straight species. So that kind of solves maybe a landscape maintenance issue that you would see on the straight species. So again, a bit more compact, not going to sucker for you guys, and really nice multi-season interest. This plant's also incredibly hardy to zone 3. So great for the Midwest, great for our area. So that is Aronia, low-scape hedger, and low-scape mound.
All right, our next plant is Diarvilla sessilifolia butterfly. If you've been watching our presentations, I think we've covered almost every Diarvilla that we carry in one way or another. So this, as the common name southern bush honeysuckle implies, this is native to the southern United States. And it, you know, is a good plant for clay soil because it's adaptable to many soils. So it does tolerate poor soil. It needs some drainage. So if it's like, heavy clay that like sits wet all the time, this isn't going to be the best. But this plant has a nice compact habit, so 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. You can see the nice rounded shape there. As the new growth comes out, it kind of has that bronzish tinge to it. Deer resistant plant. I see we were getting questions on the Aronia again with the deer and rabbit resistance. Again, this one probably not as tried and true on the rabbits as the deer. But so drought tolerant and salt tolerant as well. It has those, we don't have it pictured here, or maybe they're very small there, but the nice yellow flowers in about June. These have a really nice cluster of yellow flowers, so they're great for pollinators, which is, I know, a huge thing, why we've mentioned them in some of the other talks. So another great plant for clay here is Diarabella butterfly.
All right, we can blow through a couple of these questions too. So where's Midwest Trading located? Midwest Trading is actually located in St. Charles as well. You can pick up at our main facility here in St. Charles, Illinois. Yeah, they also are headquartered in Virgil, Illinois too. Yeah, on the Aronia, I don't know, Shannon, have we seen, I feel like we haven't seen much issue with rabbits here. Even deer, I don't think we've actually had, and we do have deer on the property.
We do have deer on the property. I would say, so the spot that we have these planted in is near the dry shade garden, which is kind of the front of the property near you pick. I would say it's probably not a spot that the deer really travel to or get that far into the nursery. So we haven't seen them there. Have not seen rabbit damage on these, but again, I think that we have so much on our property that we really don't see like a massive blanket of rabbit damage on anything like sometimes you would on a residential property. But no, at this point have not seen any issues with rabbits.
Yeah, and like a winter like this winter where there was such heavy snow, that's especially too when you start seeing rabbit damage on shrubs and at weird heights because they're on top of the snow and then they start nibbling at things. So they're like little pruners out there and maybe not pruning our shrubs the way we would like, but there you go. We have to live with the wildlife, unfortunately. So, okay. So the next plant we're going to talk about is Monarda didyma Coral Reef. So if you guys haven't seen this plant when it's in flower, it is like breathtaking. So the pictures don't even, I feel like, do it justice. The pink color, it's almost like pinky orange fluorescent. It's absolutely striking when this guy's in bloom. So really interesting flower color, blooms from June to September. And I think one of the great things with this plant in clay too, if you guys have experienced Monarda before, they can grow quickly and kind of take over an area. The clay soil actually helps keep this guy in check. So it'll kind of keep it to its more normal growing range and will make sure that it doesn't get unruly in the garden. So this one also has good resistance to powdery mildew. Now, I'm not telling you that it will be powdery mildew free, but has better powdery mildew resistance. So if you guys are planting Monarda, just make sure that it has some good airflow around the plant. Don't really plant things on top of it because it does need that air circulation to maintain clean foliage. So if you guys can give this guy a little room to breathe, you will see, a better resistance on the mildew on the foliage. And one more note on this one does not like wet feet in the winter. So although it is more tolerant of clay soils, I think most Monarda don't want to be sitting in water over the winter because you will see, some issues there. So keep it a little bit more on the dry side. And finally, this one is a pollinator magnet. So I keep talking about pollinator plants too. If you love hummingbirds, this is a great one to plant. So Monarda Coral Reef.
Yeah, kind of on that note, this one is a great pollinator plant as well. So this is Liatris Pycnostachya. So you're probably more familiar with Liatris spicata. These are actually very similar. Going to have a lot of the same attributes. If anything, this one probably gets a little bit taller than that one at the 5 to 6 foot range or so. But the flowers themselves look pretty similar, and in terms of their preferences, they are pretty similar as well. So they prefer to dry to medium soils, but they can take the clay soils. better than any of the other Liatris are, though, so there's the rough blazing star, there are several other varieties. So these two are going to be best for that. As Nikki said on the Monarda, this is kind of the same situation where it's not going to want to sit in a real wet spot over the winter. So I know we're saying these are good for clay, and lots of times clay soils tend to be kind of wet. So it is kind of, picking your attributes wisely, I guess, where, clay can just be kind of a tricky spot. Otherwise, it does tolerate a lot of the other conditions, poor soil, drought, heat and humidity. It does well with all of those things. Yes, that is Liatris Pycnostachya. On to the next.
Okay, so I think most of us think of hibiscus as a more tropical plant, something we would see in Florida, but we do have native hibiscus, which I think is pretty awesome. So we have two in particular. We're going to highlight one today. So Hibiscus moschitos is a native, and we carry it in our natural garden native line. So again, local ecotype here to Chicago. Chicagoland area, and this one's really beautiful. Taller plant, gets about 4 to 6 feet tall, 3 to 4 feet wide, so on the bigger side, but gets these beautiful light pink flowers that look very tropical in the summertime. So if you're a fan of kind of tropical looking plants but want to plant a native, hey, hibiscus is your plant. So this one likes full sun, and it's going to bloom July through September, so it has actually a nice kind of robust flowering window, and a great pollinator plant. So this one, I will mention, doesn't really like to dry out completely. So it does like a bit of a deeper watering, at least, once a week, especially if we're going through a period where we don't have a lot of rain. So make sure to keep this one well watered. And if you want to keep it more on the compact side, you can pinch it back. Once it hits about a little over a foot, you can pinch it back a couple nodes on the foliage to make sure that it stays on the more compact side for you. Finally, one other note. So this one also, excuse me, wrong plant. So if you guys want to, again, keep it shorter, pinch it back once it reaches about a foot tall, and then pruning wise, you guys can cut this guy back in the fall. So before you go over the winter. So this is Hibiscus moschitos.
All right, we had a couple questions back on the Liatris. Can it handle wetter conditions in the summer? Maybe a little bit, but it does seem that it wants to stay, on the moist, well-drained to drier side. The bloom time for that is July and August, so kind of similar to the spicata. And then Nikki, we had a couple questions on the hibiscus. Deer resistance, trying to remember. I believe they are.
Yeah, I think they are too. And that picture that was on the last slide, that's from our perennial island. So, I mean, it didn't really get mowed down by the deer last year. Honestly, if they prune it a little bit in the spring, I mean, it's not a huge issue because the plant is on the bigger side. And then soil moisture on hibiscus. So hibiscus is another one of those plants, native plants that can take wetter periods and then can take some drier periods. It just isn't like extended dry periods because the foliage will start to kind of dry out. But it can take wetter periods. It's also a good rain garden plant as well. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so then here we have the summerific series, just to highlight a little different angle on the hibiscus. So as Nikki said, these are the same, where they're going to want, either moist, well-drained or moist soil, but not necessarily these, less so than the native are going to want to like sit in standing water. So these do have, again, the really strong taproot, kind of bust through the clay. So they don't have any issues with those heavier soils or the heavier wet soils as well. So we've talked about these in one of our earlier webinars, since they're a new introduction for us this year. But these are fantastic compared to some of the older hibiscus. They're a little more compact, so 3, 4, 5 feet tall or so. And they've done a lot of breeding to, on the old hibiscus, it would kind of be the flowers like right at the top of the plant, and so they wouldn't bloom for that long. These are covered in blooms from the base of the plant all the way up to the top. So, you get a nice full flowered plant. It extends the bloom time, so they're just fantastic. We're really excited to begin offering these 3 this year. So that is the Summerific series, Berry Awesome, Cherry Chocolate, and Holy Grail. So we have our last poll.
These don't reseed, correct, Shannon, the Summerific?
No, no.
These new hibiscus, no, do not, no reseeding on these.
Nope.
All right, Coral Reef.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, yeah, the Aronia Summerific series. They're all really good options. So.
But yeah, I think the Coral Reef, the fact that the clay, if anything, will help keep it in check a little bit is really nice.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We have one final education series next Friday. So that's going to be on native plants. So I know we've been getting asked a lot of questions about natives. So next presentation will be all natives the whole hour. So make sure to join us. That'll be the last one until we head into spring, because I know we're all going to start getting real busy here, especially with the weather on the horizon looking pretty spring-like. So, but Shannon and I will be around all spring on Instagram. So every other week we will be walking the gardens to give you guys updates on what's looking good. And if you guys want more education, please check out our YouTube page to see our Midwest Garden Pro Series videos. And we have plans to release, I think, 5 more videos this year. So be on the lookout for those in our newsletter. But thank you guys so much for taking the time to spend an hour with us today. Shannon and I love it. We love nerding out about plants, and have a great rest of your Friday.
All right, Nikki, we had a quick question of our earlier talks. Where can people find those?
Yeah, so all of our earlier talks are on YouTube. So like Jamie alluded to, I think in the beginning, this I believe is our 7th education video this winter. So, and they've been really well attended. We've videoed all of them. So make sure to check out our YouTube page to reference those.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Friday.